After spending the night in Swansea, the team head towards Campbelltown, a well-known Thylacine hotspot.
Bill, we're heading from Swansea to Campbelltown. Anything interesting happening out near Campbelltown?
Funny you should say that, Warren. I have a newspaper article here which dates back to September 1905.
That was when you were a young lad, wasn't it? 1905?
I was probably a teen then. Okay, I'll just read it out to you. A large Tasmanian tiger was caught in a snare by a trapper named John Nichols on the Windfall Estate, which is actually this side of Campbelltown.
Right.
Recently, the animal was found dead, and Nichols was supplied for. No, sorry, it's hard to read when you're bouncing this. Nichols has applied for and will receive the due course of £1 reward for the destruction of these animals.
The old bounty plane.
Yeah, we want to destroy these two terrible animals, don't we?
So, Campbelltown area, we've had a number of sightings directly made to TAU over the years. What do you think about in terms of the habitat to support a remnant population of thylacine?
Just looking around at the habitat now, we've got mountains back there, possible den sites. We've got nice open areas here. What I would say is be green for Tasmanian devils.
Yeah.
We've got farmlands, which means we're seeing roadkill, we're seeing wallabies on the side of the road. You've got your food source. We've got our places for them to hide. We've got places for them to hunt. Just going over a bridge. We've got water source. There's everything here they need to survive. So yeah, it's not bad habitat.
Now, what about fence lines and the thylacine's ability to get over some of these fences?
Well, we don't really know how well a thylacine can hunt, to hop or jump. I would, just looking at the structure of their back legs, I would assume that they would be able to jump pretty well. I know, I've had young wallabies in my care that's just hopped straight over a 5-foot fence from a standing position.
Yeah.
Also had Tasmanian devils where you're sort of holding a piece of meat up and they launch themselves up and jump, and they're a lot more stockier and heavy, in proportion to their legs and their body weight. And then say a thylacine, which is a lot leaner, I would assume as long as the thylacine can see the fence, that it should be able to jump over quite well. Or, like you see a lot of sheep push their way through. And the other thing is where you got wombats just either bulldoze their way through a fence or they'll just go underneath.
Yeah.
A thylacine can easily go anywhere a wombat could.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple of things about most of the fences that we see in this country is that it's only the top strand that's the barbed wire strand.
Yeah.
And they're not particularly high, they're sort of at a metre, 1.2 metres, and there's also plenty of locations where they're actually quite close to the ground because animals have pushed them over, and just time has sort of made the fence paling sort of loose.
When I was working in the zoo industry, they said to keep in a Tasmanian devil, the fence line had to be at least 90 centimetres. We found it had to be at least a metre.
Yep.
Even like a metre 20 to really keep them in, because 90 centimetres, a Tasmanian devil get over that.
Yeah.
So yeah, these are probably about that 90 centimetre range, which is like in the old measurement a yard.
Yep.
I can't see how a thylacine would have a problem getting over a fence like that.
Well, I think the other important story that we have was from the gent in Swansea who had lassoed the thylacine, and it jumped out of a stall, and had it not been for the fact that it had something around its neck, it could have actually gotten away, and that would have been at least that high, if not higher.
Well, it would have to be that high because the account said that its feet didn't touch the ground.
Yep.
So it jumped over.
Yep.
So yeah, that would have to be probably 1.5 meters. It must have hopped over to be able to hang itself like that.
Certainly interesting territory, and I think we've had a number of sightings here where when we've looked at maps, there's definitely fence lines that are running and surrounding the road, and the story has been that the alleged thylacine has been crossing the road or on the roadside of a fence. So it seems plausible that they're going to get past the fence somehow, whether it's under it, through it, or over it.
Yeah, and of course the other thing is there's often not a fence there too. A lot of the sightings we looked at, there's either there's not a fence there or the fence is in really disrepair.
Yeah. 5 cars in Tasmania, Bill, and they're all out when we're trying to turn.
Inconsiderate bastards.
Don't they know that we've got a Thylacine road trip happening here?
The vicious, vicious bastards.
Off to Perth.
As the rain sets in, the team head off to Underwood. This is an area that regularly appears in the government thylacine reports.
Bill, Underwood area, late 80s, early 90s, hotspot of thylacine activity.
Certainly is, and interesting too.
Yeah, well, I kind of remember seeing some letters written to Harry Holgate, the minister at the time, complaining about the attitude of the parks and wildlife staff.
Yeah, that's right. Again, for Nicholas firing line once again. For applying scientific methods to things where there are people who absolutely believe but didn't really have hard evidence.
Yeah, I think I really sort of like the letter that one particular really enthusiastic and passionate gentleman wrote to the minister at the time, where he complained about the fact that the staff from Parks and Wildlife, in particular Nick Mooney, was rather arrogant and dismissive in listening and investigating to the reports of the local landowners.
I think once again it plays into the whole thing of scientific approach is not always the popular approach. The popular approach is, oh yeah, we believe you, mate, yeah, sure, it must be true. Scientific says, well, no, you have to show us some actual evidence.
Yeah.
And without the evidence, it's got something's word for it.
So I like the fact that the minister at the time wrote back to the particular protagonists involved in this situation and said that on no less than 10 separate occasions, Parks and Wildlife officers came out to this north-east Tasmania region, in particular Underwood, Lilydale, onto Scottsdale on occasions to do their investigations. And what did they find, Bill?
Well, mostly there was dog prints, or else there were prints that were unclear. There were hair samples from wombats and Bennett's wallabies.
Yep.
You can understand Bennett's wallaby, that's got a rusty hook to the back, but when used to hand racing, you think, yeah, this is Bennett's wallaby.
Well, sometimes it's called the redneck wallaby too, isn't it?
Redneck wallaby, yeah. So yeah, there was no real hard evidence apart from eyewitness recordings. But one of them kept saying, you know, that there was many a time they could have shot the thylacine,
Yep.
but they didn't because it was a thylacine.
Yep.
I think there was another response from Nick saying pretty much shoot it because he's so sure that it was just a wild dog.
Yep.
And not a thylacine. He said, look, I'll take responsibility and just shoot it.
Yeah, I think that's it was quite interesting because in a couple of instances in that space, Nick has made file notes, so it's not an internal or an external piece of correspondence, but it's a note that's meant to go on to file to basically record a lot of the incidental type of things that are happening, also some of the decision-making process that's happening. So should they be held account or be some sort of formal inquiry, that they could refer to those notes. And I think that speaks volume for, I guess, the amount of emotion that was happening in the background and And I think as a public servant, essentially as Nick Mooney was, he needed to make those observations to, not only protect himself but also to protect the department.
Yeah, and once again, as much as I'd love to believe that now, as much as we'd like this all to be true, and really science demands a lot more evidence. But it also comes up to the other interesting thing is like a court of law doesn't need that much evidence.
Yeah.
And so how do you get to the truth? Science can sort of say, yes, absolutely, 100% there is something here if they've got the evidence. If they haven't got the evidence, or they say, well, it's probable or it's not probable, it's not giving an answer. And we don't believe everything we hear, but maybe these places are worth much more investigation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the point that you make about what's good enough for a court of law versus what's good enough for the court of science, if you like, is an interesting point, because I think that that's what some of the people who are corresponding with the minister are complaining about, saying, look, eyewitness testimony is good enough in courts of law, so therefore you've got good, reputable people who've lived in these parts for a long time, their word should be accepted.
I like to use Penny's pork crackling for my bait and for myself. I am just putting some more bait around here, because if we can get a herbivore to come into this area, the scent of the herbivore might bring a predator tracking it down. So sometimes best bait's live bait.
Just marking the location of these two cameras, sighted at 90 degrees of each other on the GPS, so we can find our way back here. So Bill, the Lilydale Underwood area, good recent history of thylacine sightings.
Definitely. So we've found a bit of forest, which we like as far as habitat goes. There's water, possible den sites, it's hard to say, but quite a good bit of habitat here.
Yeah, absolutely. I like the fact that there's actually a bit of a mix from plantation and also natural remnant forest here. It provides a lot of additional ground space for things to come up in terms of vegetation, which is going to bring the prey species in.
Yeah, so where we put it was sort of like a damp area, which is probably not prime thylacine habitat. However, I believe there's enough dry mixed around here for them to maybe pass through, have a drink. Now we baited one camera with the pork crackling.
Penny's crispy pork crackling.
Penny's crispy pork crackling.
Known to lure quolls in.
Yeah, well known to lure in spotted tail quolls. So, you know, that may entice another predator to come and check that out. And then in front of the other camera, we put a bit of apple.
Yep.
And so my thought is that we should get some shots of wallabies, probably possums, to have an idea of the prey species in this area, but also their presence may also bring a predator that might be following the same scent trail, because I'm sure a possum leaves down a good scent trail. In fact, wherever it goes, it just leaves a little drop of urine wherever it goes. So that could be a scent trail for a predator to follow.
And I think the other thing is we saw lots of scat. In fact, just looking around the ground now, we can see sort of scat around us. So
yeah, most of it's wallaby.
Yep.
Which again is prey species.
Now, Bill, it's sort of around about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, so it gets dark around here about 5. So we're starting to get into the territory of twilight when the marsupial carnivores are going to be more active.
It's either that or first thing in the morning. Either way. I think our presence here might spook off a lot of them.
Yep.
So it's probably why we should move on pretty quickly, get out of here in the next half hour, so the whole place is quiet.
Yep. Well, you touch on a really good point in terms of it. It's something that, you know, people have written to us in the past and saying that we should be living in a tree stand or a hide, you know, for months on end, those sorts of things, waiting to get a one-on-one view with our own eyeballs and potentially a camera that we're carrying with us.
It's unfeasible. I mean, we've got lives, we cannot afford to actually sit out here.
Yeah.
But I'd sort of say that if I've been in an area, eventually I do tend to see a lot of wildlife, because things like devils, quolls, snakes, birds of prey, they get used to the presence of somebody. They just say, well, this is just part of the landscape. They tend to just take it in their stride. I tend to think if somebody was to live out in the wilderness, I mean, people have tried it before. Dick Smith have paid people to do it. I would tend to think that, you know, if there was a thylacine out there, if you lived in prime thylacine habitat for like about 10 years, you might spot one. Yeah, that's what I would think. And still, who's going to pay me to live for 10 years out in the wilderness?
Certainly not me.
Is there any sponsors out there?
Well, I think it's a really good point you make, and I think if you think about the history of thylacine observation, a number of people have said, you know, these are old timers when thylacine was still known to be extinct, would say that prime thylacine habitat, bushmen, they might see one every now and again. So I guess what that proves, I guess, is the fact that, you know, the thylacines were semi-curious, and there's plenty of stories of thylacines walking into people's camps when they were abundant, or if they ever were abundant, or at least are still about. So
yeah, exactly. And what you get is the case where, say, for example, they want to put on a show for tourists for devils to feed. Well, a lot of these tourist operators will do is they'll get there and put a radio on and just let the radio play in the wilderness for a couple of days. Then when you sneak your people in, the animals are already used to that noise and they're just taking it in their stride. Very much the same as you see a big bird of prey sitting on the side of the road, cars are whizzing by, takes no notice. As soon as you stop the car, it's going to fly off. So they sort of adapt and get used to certain activity. The trouble is, you know, like I say, I think you need probably a 10-year living in the wilderness to actually see it. And people we know and we've interviewed, say like Rusty, for example, he sighted a few of them, and he lived out there for quite a while.
Absolutely. I think the other thing too is that we sometimes forget is that these animals aren't robots, they're individuals. Every animal that you meet has got its own individual sort of quirks and personalities. We just have to think about our pets. You know, if I've had dogs that are quite extrovert, and I've had dogs that are quite timid.
And I think here's another example. I lived out of town, and I was like this local snake man who'd go and pick up snakes and things like that. I lived there for about 20 years, and tiger snake's a very common animal. Didn't see any. For 20 years. I saw one copperhead, which is even more prolific. I would sort of think I was living just right behind a swamp or a dam. should see stacks of them. I saw one in 20 years. And so even living in an area doesn't guarantee you're going to see something.
Yep.
It just makes it more likely.
Yeah. Well, in fact, I just read a book, Tasmanian Tiger, Extinct or Extant, edited by Rebecca Lang and Mike Williams. In it, it's got a chapter by Nick Mooney. He talks about a particular forest in Tasmania that is well known to have a very, very large population of deer. And he said that he's literally been into this forest 1,000 times and he's never seen a deer in that entire time, but he knows they're there.
Yes, that's right, and it's quite often the case. It's okay. Snake example again. I could take you to places there's snakes, but I can't guarantee you're going to see one. I can almost guarantee you're going to see a copperhead at the right time of year in the right location. I can never guarantee a tiger snake. That's just pot luck.
Yep.
And you'll find this with platypus. There's one or two places I know I can definitely see it, but all the rest of the time it's just like, oh, there's a platypus,
Yeah, and we've found platypus while we've been out, when we were out at Adamsfield, for example.
Yeah.
Just randomly, there it was.
And yeah, if you was to take a tour group out, you wouldn't find
Absolutely.
it. So there are a lot of animals that we just don't see in the wild that often. And another really good example is Tasmanian devils.
Yep.
Around Devonport, where I am, both sides of Devonport, right on the skirts of town, I've seen devil droppings everywhere. In fact, all the way around, east, west and south of Devonport, devil droppings everywhere. People in Devonport never ever see a Tasmanian devil. So, a good example, a very elusive animal that only comes out, when they're in low light.
Yep.
It's very hard to see.
Absolutely.
Especially if it doesn't want to be seen.
All right, let's get on to our next stop.
Let's hit the road.